Welcome to the Kentucky Private Applicator Training Certification Program. By completing this training, you'll be allowed to buy and apply restricted and general use pesticides to produce any agricultural commodity. Applications can be on property that you own or lease and/or the land of your employer. However, some dicamba and gramoxone products require additional training and certification. You can apply pesticides to the lands of a farmer neighbor without compensation other than trading personal services. And with this certification, you can annually train workers to satisfy the worker protection standards. Your private applicator certification is valid for 3 years and expires on December 31st of the third year. This program can be customized to fit your agricultural operation, including grains, pasture, tobacco, fruit, vegetables, and greenhouses. Certified private applicators are expected to have practical knowledge of common pests and their damage. They should be able to read and understand pesticide labeling information, including common name of the pesticide applied, pests to be controlled, timing and methods of application, safety precautions, any pre-harvest and restricted entry intervals, and any specific disposal procedures. You should know how to follow label instructions and warnings, be able to prepare concentrations and calibrate application equipment, and be able to recognize local environmental situations that must be considered during application to avoid contamination. Be able to recognize poison symptoms and procedures to follow in case of a pesticide accident. Know and follow the rules for pesticide record keeping. Understand and comply with the worker protection standards. And finally, store pesticides in accordance with federal and state laws and regulations. After completing this training, you'll be issued a private applicator's card with your certification number. You will need this card to purchase restricted use pesticide. While lists of current certified applicators are posted online by county in Kentucky and indicate when their certification will expire, the Personal Information Security Act does not allow us to post your identification number. You are the only one that can provide this number directly to pesticide dealers, and they are required to have these numbers for their sales records. You must record all pesticide applications, both general and restricted use pesticides, within 14 days of the application. Kentucky requires that these records be maintained for 3 years. Commercial custom applicators must provide you a copy of any application they make within 30 days. In 2017, a pollinator protection plan was developed through the leadership of the Kentucky Department of Agriculture with many other agencies and organizations within the state. This plan includes best management practices for beekeepers, pesticide applicators, and landowners, as well as a communication tool which can be used by applicators to alert nearby beekeepers when certain pesticides require this. The Worker Protection Standard is an EPA-administered regulation to reduce pesticide exposure among agricultural workers and pesticide handlers. Agricultural workers and pesticide handlers must be trained each year before they begin their work. There is no grace period. Training must meet with EPA standards and be approved. The PERC video meets this requirement for the basic training. There are 3 parts to this: informing workers and handlers about pesticide safety, providing protection from potential exposure, and mitigating exposures that do occur. Anyone except family members employed, including self-employed, for any type of compensation by an agricultural establishment or commercial pesticide handling establishment that uses pesticides in the production of plants on a farm, forest, nursery, or greenhouse is covered by worker protection standards. These rules apply to the owners and employers on these types of agricultural and pesticide handling establishments. Worker protection requirements must be followed whenever there's an agricultural use requirements box on the label of a pesticide that is being applied and the pesticide is applied on farms, forests, nurseries, or greenhouses. Many pesticides now require respirators during mixing, application, or cleanup. For these pesticides, you must use a respirator and have a medical evaluation permitting you to wear the respirator while working. The label will describe the level of respirator required. You also need to be annually fit tested for each type of respirator you will wear. Respirator fit testing must comply with the OSHA standards. You'll need to keep these records for 2 years. Worker protection precautions cover the two types of employees: pesticide handlers and agricultural workers. Pesticide handlers are those who mix, load, or apply agricultural pesticides, handle open pesticide containers, clean or repair pesticide application equipment, enter enclosed treated areas before the ventilation requirements have been met, dispose of pesticides or containers, or assist with the application of pesticides. Agricultural workers are those that perform hand labor tasks in pesticide-treated crops or lands. This includes various types of activities, including harvesting, pruning, thinning, and trellising of plants. Here are some things you can do to comply with the worker protection standards. Ensure that all pesticide handlers and early entry workers are at least 18 years old. Post warning signs for all pesticide applications with a restricted entry interval, or REI, of more than 48 hours. Provide safety data sheets along with pesticide application information at a central display site. Provide emergency eye wash systems at pesticide mixing and loading sites. Provide the new pesticide safety poster at the central display location and at decontamination sites. Implement application exclusion zones by keeping workers and other people away from the application equipment and treated areas during pesticide applications. This is at least 100 feet from ground application equipment. There's a lot of information to familiarize yourself with. On the UK Pesticide Safety Education Program information page, you can find the Applying Pesticides Correctly core manual, as well as other links to training materials in Spanish. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. This is Tad Campbell, Mason County Extension Agent for Ag and Natural Resources. Along with me is Philip Konopka, Lewis County Ag and Natural Resource Agent. And we're going to talk a little bit about getting familiar and understanding pesticide labels. As a pesticide applicator, it's really important that we know how to navigate a label, because there's a lot of important parts in that label that sometimes we need to go and find rather than them just being right there in front of our eyes to be able to get the correct information that we need on various situations. The big thing is that we need to know the label as well, because we have to keep records of all these chemicals that we're applying. And for us to be able to get the correct information to have a compliant record, we need to know how to navigate that label to be able to get the information we need.
And don't forget, the label is the law, so we have to follow that specifically or we're breaking the law in essence.
That is correct. That is very true. So, with that being said, let's get right into it. Philip, what are the different classifications of pesticides?
Well, you have two different types of classifications, Tad. There's general use and restricted use, okay? General use, you don't have to have any special certifications to purchase this, such as an example that would be the lower span 50W, okay? Versus on this example, the restricted use is lower band 4E. Notice it's the same name, it's a different formulation. It also specifically says that it's restricted use. If it is restricted use, you have to have a private pesticide application license. I'm not saying that general use is more safe. Usually the restricted is for either safety reasons for people that are applying it or environmental reasons as well.
Correct. And when you see that restricted use box on a particular chemical, it's going to tell you why it's deemed restricted based on the information that's in that box, correct? It
Correct.
will tell you what particular thing it's harmful to in that relationship. And that's true. And it's really important that we realize that general use or restricted use, both are chemicals that we are utilizing to get rid of some kind of a pest in our operation. And even though the restricted use gets the most notoriety as far as the potential to cause the most damage and harm, there can be a lot of cases where the general use can be as in cases where it's just as harmful.
Yes,
and things like that.
I would treat any chemical as it being very dangerous, especially if you are the person that's applying it.
Okay, good information. So, with that being, okay, Philip, why don't we go ahead and get started here and start talking a little bit about parts of the label. This is just a standard label that you'll see on most containers and everything like that. All the information that's on this label is going to be on all the other labels that we see, no matter what the trade name, brand name, and company, and all that good stuff. So let's go through here and try to identify some of the things that we need to know as applicators for record keeping and just becoming familiar with the parts of the label itself.
Sure. We've got the brand name, or the common name, what most farmers know the chemical by. Active ingredient. We need to pay special attention to that and see what is actually controlling the pest, what type of chemicals are doing that. The registration number is very easily confused with the establishment number. We want to make sure that we get the registration number. That's very important. Each pesticide that is labeled with the EPA has its own individual registration number.
And some containers do have an EPA establishment number as well too, but we're wanting to make sure that we concentrate on that registration number, correct?
Correct. And then what size of container it comes in. This particular one comes in 1 gallon. 2.5 gallons is a pretty common size, and then if you're a larger farmer, you can get up to several gallons per container. I love that. Keep out of the reach of children. Should be keep out of the reach of everybody that's not applying the pesticide. That means that this product can do some harm, especially to little people or little children that we're trying to protect. And then the bottom part always has the name and address of the manufacturer. So if you got questions or something like that, we can fall back onto that.
So we can contact them if we need to from that standpoint. Well, we're going to move forward with the label and still looking at that front panel. We know that the net contents is 1 gallon. We talked about that in the last slide. You know, we've got the signal word. It's caution. That could be caution, could be warning, it could be danger. And that danger can be actually offered in a couple of different ways. It could be written out as danger, or it could be a skull and crossbones, kind of just a picture, so that we are aware of those kind of things. But this is where we're going to see the action word or the signal word that we're most concerned with, as far as basically dictating the harmfulness of that product.
Sure. Another way to think of it is kind of, if you're a beef farmer, how to grade beef. You got prime, select, and choice. Those, the more marble you got, the higher the cut. In this case, it is caution, which means slightly toxic. That's probably one of the safer products out on the market. Warning, we increase our toxicity a little bit. And then danger is very highly toxic. So if you see that word danger, or like Tad said, the skull and crossbones, handle that with very, very careful caution.
Correct. And we need to handle all these chemicals cautiously, but do pay particularly more attention from start to finish when you start seeing that signal word called danger, because it is a highly powerful chemical for it in its own regard from that side of things.
Especially when you're mixing the products, because that is the opportune time you're going to come in, better chance of coming in with a highly concentrated dose of that chemical.
Yes. As applicators, during the mixing process, that's when we're most vulnerable to the highest exposure to any of these products. And we want to kind of think about that. And we may talk about that a little bit later, but what are we wearing? Most of us have the same pair of shoes that we put on in the morning, that we wear all day on the farm. Usually it's steel-toed leather type work boots or something like that, correct? And if we get some of that chemical into our leather work boots and not realize it, we could run into some problems down the road 2 or 3 days later and not realize that we've exposed ourselves during the mixing time 3 or 4 days prior to. So we need to be aware of what we're doing and how we're doing it with these chemicals. So we're going to get a little bit back onto the label. Sorry to get off track. But another part of the label is the first aid section.
You definitely need to read that before you even begin to open up or apply pesticide, because if something would accidentally happen, you want to be ready to act.
This is your first mode on how to treat an overexposure to a chemical, and it's here on the label. You know, that's the first thing that we need to be doing. We need to make sure that there's someone else that knows when we're mixing these chemicals, so that they know where this part of the label is as well, because if we get incapacitated, we may not be able to divulge on what was going on. Someone else may have to be the one, talking for our behalf, and it's really important that they understand where this part of the label is, at mixing time, application time, and things like that.
Yeah, I think you brought up a good point, Tad. If somebody's not there with you to help you, to watch you, make sure somebody knows where you're at all times. So if something does happen, heaven forbid, we can get the proper treatment if needed.
Correct. And then we've got the hazard to human and domestic animals caution, and what to do, and if it's possible, things that we could work through from that side of things as well, too.
Personal protective equipment. That is great. I mean, you need to read that. That is the minimum amount of protection that you need when mixing and applying this chemical.
Right. And as Philip said in the very first slide, the label's law. And for us to apply and mix this chemical legally, we must be wearing that minimum PPE, that personal protective equipment. And as farmers, as applicators, sometimes that's the part we overlook the most. The part that actually is going to protect us as individuals is the part we sometimes overlook the most. And yes, there's days when we're mixing and applying chemicals that it's hot, it's nasty. It's not. You do not want to be in long sleeves. You don't want to have the extra gear on to be able to handle these chemicals properly. But that is put on there through testing to make sure that it is safe for you as the applicator to be able to handle that product. And small amounts of exposure over a long period of time can cause a lot of ill effects to the human body. And we ultimately are applying a product that is getting rid of a pest. Mm-hmm. And if we get too much of that into our systems over a period of time by not wearing the proper PPE, we can start seeing problems associated with our health as well, too.
Correct, yeah. And we want to make sure we take care of ourselves, for sure.
Definitely. And it's got environmental hazards on the label as well as user safety recommendations too. So do make sure that you're reading the complete label, and don't just overlook or skim the personal protective equipment section. That is really important for us all to follow, as is all parts of the label. But this is one that we definitely want to follow, because it's our protection.
Yeah,
make sure we get this product on properly.
Directions for use. Like we said earlier, this is the law. Any time you go off label without having the proper documentation, you're breaking the law, essentially.
Correct. And we've talked about it in a previous presentation about the record keeping, but this agricultural use requirement section has a lot of vital information, but it's the one area where we see the REI. And it can give an REI for this product. And then you can see in this one that some states have 4-hour REIs, while California has a 12-hour REI. So it can vary from state to state, depending on what has been approved through testing and things like that.
So keep in mind, if you have to go back into your treated area before the restricted entry interval, or REI, is up, you need to go back to that first slide and get the personal protective equipment back on before you enter that field.
Correct.
For your protection.
Again, we want to protect ourselves.
Some other additional information that you can find in the label, mixing application instructions. Some chemicals, if you mix together, have to be mixed in a certain order.
Correct.
So we want to make sure that we don't gum up our system. You're talking about a fun day. It's bad enough spraying, but now if you got to get down in a sprayer to clean it out, that's a whole nother day's job.
And something that we could just do by the order in which we would mix things to prevent that. So knowing and reading the label makes a big difference. When you're talking about mixing chemicals, not all chemicals are compatible with one another. And the label should allow you the opportunity to mix that. But most of the time when you mix chemicals, even the label recommends that you do that in a test situation rather than just doing it in your tank. And one of the short video clips that we'll have as part of this presentation is the jar test method. And that's a really quick way of knowing if two chemicals are going to be compatible or not when you put them in a tank mix. And it's much better to do it in a small case scenario like that rather than to have gallons and gallons of this product that's not going to work very well at all.
Not to mention the money we've just thrown away by not doing a simple little jar test for compatibility. Also, what's going to be on here, pest and disease management. I mean, the pest that we're actually going after, a specific chemical may not control it. So we want to make sure that our pest that we're trying to control is labeled on that particular chemical.
Right. And it's going to tell us, where our other restrictions are, where can we use this or not use that particular product, as well as fumigation requirements, drift management, and then the restrictions with rotational crops. If you're spraying a grain field today or on this day, it may have an effect on what kind of forage you can plant behind that for not only weeks, but could be months up to a year or so before you could plant certain kinds of things behind that. So knowing what we're applying and being familiar with the label from that aspect allows us to be able to make decisions that moving forward, we may want to rotate those fields out of something and into something else to make them productive in other ways for us. And if we do something in the beginning that's going to deter that, then we basically lock ourselves into some things that we don't necessarily want to be in as far as situations go with our farm operation.
Some more storage. Storage is extremely important. I wouldn't recommend personally that you purchase any more than you're going to use that particular season.
Right. But no need to have a lot of extra stuff on hand due to the volatility and the sheer concern with these products. With them being designed the way that they are, we just don't want to have a lot of excess products sticking around. However, if we do run into a situation where we're spraying multiple things and we're not spraying a lot of it, but we're spraying multiple products, what do you recommend as far as a storage area?
We need a specific storage area with plenty of labeling so that we can warn emergency crews if something would happen that, hey, there is some dangerous products here. Make sure it's locked. Make sure it's ventilated. It'll go into the label specifically what it needs for this particular product to be stored. And the longer you have the product, accidents happen. I mean, that's just the way things work. And the longer you have it, the more chance you have to have an accident to happen.
True. And we don't want to store these chemicals in other rooms or storage areas where we may have livestock feed, consumables, those kind of things. So we may want to look at dedicating an area or a space that we can make into a storage room for these chemicals, since they are pretty independent of themselves, when we start looking at our operation goes.
You may want to also store them into a plastic container. So if something would happen to the original container, it would break. It wouldn't leak down into the ground. It would be caught into that plastic container, and then we can deal with it from that point.
Good ideas. And then pesticide removal or disposal. If you have extra pesticides that you want to dispose of, you're not going to use them. You acquire a farm and there's already some there, which isn't far-fetched. I mean, we've had several situations like that. You can contact the Kentucky Department of Agriculture, and they can work with you and try to schedule a time to actually dispose of those products properly with you. A lot of times they may come out and do that. Other times they'll find out what kind of product you've got and walk you through the process of proper disposal from that.
And don't be scared to call them. I mean, you're not going to get in trouble. They want you to call them to dispose of these properly. That way we're not worried about the environment, your health, or somebody else's property.
Correct. Yeah, it's definitely an open line kind of a communication with them, and they're always willing to try to help for your safety, the environment's safety, and to get rid of the products that aren't needed any longer from that situation. So definitely something to keep in mind as you look into those situations, acquiring a farm that's got old pesticides on it, or just running out of uses for some of the stuff that you bought in the past.
So you've done a good job of management. You've only brought the products that you need to use for the crop. What you get done with the empty jugs, triple rinse them, and a lot of counties have got a rinse and return program.
They do. There's rinse and return programs, and a lot of times you can contact your disposal or landfill and see if they are accepting those as well too. If they've been properly triple rinsed and packaged the way that they're supposed to be packaged. But KDA does offer regional pickups at certain times of the year. So as producers, we can store our pesticide containers after they've been rinsed out. And usually in late spring, early summer, and then early fall, they offer a couple of times a year to get in certain areas to be able to pick those containers up. And anyone that has any questions about those potentials can contact the local extension office, and they can give you kind of a time frame to be looking for those rinse and return program pickups for containers.
But please don't burn them. That opens up a whole nother can of worms from an air control pollution standpoint to some of these residues that may not completely be destroyed by the fire as well, and then ultimately endangering your health. So we don't want that to happen. So dispose of those pesticide jugs properly.
Good comment. Well, we've talked about the pesticide label being the law. Everything that's on there is what we have to follow and things like that. Even saying that, there are a few exceptions to pesticide labels, correct?
Oh, there's always exceptions.
There's exceptions. So we do have the ability to apply pesticide at a dosage or concentration or at a less frequency than listed on the label. However, the caution with that particular statement is that we're dealing with a lot of resistant weeds right now that are cumbersome in a lot of cropping scenarios right now, where we can't control those through some of the methods that we have in hand, or it's very difficult.
And not just weeds. I mean, some of the insect
pests,
fungicides and all that kind of stuff. And they're nothing new is coming down the pipe. So, I mean, what we got is what we got.
Right. We're not getting a lot of new chemicals to control different kinds of pests. So we're basically trying to utilize the ones that we already have to our usage right now. And so if we continually to lessen the rate that's been stringently tested over time to come up with these labels, then we could run ourselves into a situation where we see more resistance out there with some of these chemicals than if we were using just the minimum rates. Another exception would be apply pesticide against a pest not listed on the labelings, so long as the animal, plant, or site is listed. So the pest may not be listed, but the area that you're applying it to could be, and that way you can still apply it for hopeful control of that particular pest. Use of equipment or method of application not prohibited by the labeling. If it doesn't say that you can't aerial apply those chemicals, then in essence you could have those aerial applied if that was something you wanted to do.
If that was an option for you. The next one says mixing with fertilizer. Nobody likes to make any more trips than they got to.
Right.
We're all busy. It costs money to go across the field. We want to put as much stuff together as we possibly can, but maybe not necessarily the case. Sometimes we have to take another step or two to get the full utilization of the product.
Correct. And then mixing different pesticides if not prohibited by the dosages or at below the listed rates. So, again, that comes back to that jar test. If it doesn't specify that you can't mix it with other chemicals, you can try the jar test and see if it feels compatible, meeting those conditions and whatnot from that side of things. Now, in saying, talking about these exceptions, I do want to caution, our applicators that even with these exceptions, we run into trouble, situations where they can even following these exceptions are not helpful.
True. Yeah.
Across the board. So there are some exceptions, but if we follow the label as written, because it's the law, we will have much more opportunity for success with those particular products than if we are following some of these exceptions.
True, and also it will help with the longevity. Those rates are on there for a specific reason.
Right, and they've put tons and tons of money and time into coming up with these rates so that they're compatible with their products. So there is a lot of things to think about from that side of things. But just wanted to kind of throw out there are some exceptions, but we feel like the labeled minimum rates are better than trying to go below the rate or off target, things like that, because we are not allowed to do it unless it falls into one of these exceptions. We thank you guys for your time. Hopefully, discussing some of these things has been beneficial. If you have any questions about pesticide labels, feel free to contact your local extension office, and they can help you with more details about the pesticide label itself. Thank you.
Mixing pesticides can often be convenient and economical to do. Some products may even contain multiple pesticides. However, if these products are not compatible, it can cause issues such as poor distribution, clogged or damaged equipment, loss of pesticide efficacy, and increased toxicity to both plants and animal. Types of product compatibility include physical compatibility, which is when two pesticides react with another, producing a different compound and reducing the activity of the pesticide. Biological incompatibility, which is when two products that, when combined, create a phytotoxic effect on the plants. And a physical incompatibility, which can be a visual incompatibility that can make one or more products unstable or hazardous for application. Determining product compatibility is dependent on more than just the products being mixed. The water source, temperature, and how you mix your products can also play an important role. For example, municipal or city water can often be treated, resulting in a high pH. A higher pH can influence the chemical's period of activity and effectiveness. The pH can be tested by using a pH strip as seen here in this video. If the pH needs to be adjusted, you can do so by adding buffers. Water temperature may also prevent products from mixing properly or dissolving. As a general rule, if it is too uncomfortable to be outside, it is not a good time to be mixing a tank. Besides water, the order you mix your products can have a detrimental impact on your application. Some product labels will provide instructions on what order to mix your product, but if this is not the case, there is an acronym from BASF and other agrochemical companies that can be used. These are general guidelines that can be followed. Some manufacturers include this information on the product label. However, if you are unsure about the physical incompatibility, you can perform a jar test. A jar test is a simple way to test for multiple products' compatibility. If your product has a detailed way to do a jar test, I would recommend following that, but otherwise this demonstration would be a good place to start. To perform a jar test, you will first need to add a pint of water from the water source you intend to use for your field applications to a clean glass jar. Be sure to check that the pH and possibly adjust it to the recommended range for your product. After this, you will add the products to the jar in the order you intend to do in the field, making sure to stir or shake the mixture in between each newly added product. After the entire mixture is combined, feel the sides of the jar. If the jar is warm, this may suggest a chemical reaction is occurring between the products, and that may degrade or reduce your mixture's efficacy. If the products are compatible, the liquid will be smooth and free of lumps or particles. Unlike the example where we see a gummy buildup here, this type of incompatibility could cause equipment damage. Here are more examples of what you might see when your products are incompatible. You can see here the separation or other buildups that could cause damage to your tanks. When adding the products to the jar, follow the suggestion by the label. However, if there's no recommendation, you can follow this table. Jar tests evaluate physical compatibility, but it will not inform the biological compatibility or the plant's response to your mixture. Product labels can sometimes have this information, but not always. In the absence of this information, and if spraying a mixture you don't have experience with, use the jar test to spray a small test area of your crop. Possible phytotoxic effects should appear within 2 to 3 days, which could include shot holes in leaves, small circular bleach areas, or foliar tissue degrading between leaf veins.
Hi, I'm Emily Doran, Extension Assistant in the Pesticide Safety Education Program at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Using personal protective equipment, or PPE, reduces the risk of pesticide poisonings for you as an applicator. Some sort of PPE is required by most pesticide labels. You have a lot of options when it comes to PPE, so how do you know what to use? The best place to start is by reading the pesticide label for specific PPE requirements. Let's take a few minutes to look at different types of PPE and how to learn to properly use them. PPE requirements will vary from label to label, and some may not have requirements at all. If the label doesn't have any PPE, we recommend at a minimum wearing a long sleeve shirt, long pants, socks, and shoes. You could also wear a disposable coveralls like a Tyvek suit to protect your legs and arms. Gloves should also be worn even if it's not listed on the label. When it comes to gloves, there are a variety to choose from, and you have to pick the right type for the job to reduce your risk of exposure to pesticides. Here we have gloves not to wear. Latex and polyethylene do not offer enough protection, and lined gloves can absorb the pesticide and continually expose you as you apply it. What you should wear is unlined, chemical-resistant gloves. We recommend nitrile, neoprene, and butyl. In general, the thicker the glove, the more protection it has. So far, the options I've shown have all been reusable gloves that would need to be properly cleaned after each use. However, there are chemical-resistant disposable gloves like this nitrile glove. The advantage of disposable gloves offer is that there is no need to wash after each use. Instead, you can simply throw them away. Keep in mind, the thicker the disposable glove, the better protection too. The type of PPE required may be different depending on what you are doing with the pesticide. Those involved in the mixing and loading process often have higher PPE requirements than those applying pesticides. This is because mixer and loaders are exposed to concentrated pesticides, while those applying the pesticides and cleaning equipment may be exposed to diluted pesticides. In addition to the minimum PPE requirements we've just discussed, an apron, safety glasses, or face shield and respirator may be required. Some things to remember about choosing an apron. When you work with highly toxic pesticides, it needs to be chemical resistant and should cover the entire front of your body from your chest to above your knees. The safety glasses must have brow and side guards and fit properly to protect your eyes. You can also use safety glasses that easily fit over your eyeglasses. Another option for protecting eyes is a face shield. A face shield prevents pesticides from coming in contact with your eyes as well as your entire face. There are a number of different types of respirators. We will be focusing today on half-face cartridge respirators. This half-face cartridge respirator prevents you from inhaling the chemical when applying pesticides. This black organic vapor cartridge is required for filtering out pesticides. When applying pesticide, dust, or granules, place the dust covers over the cartridges. These come with the respirator. Store mask and cartridges in Ziploc bag to keep them in good condition and the mask clean. Replace cartridges as needed, such as after 8 hours of continuous use. Do seal checks and ampule testing before each use to ensure proper fit and to determine if the cartridges are fitting properly. Be sure to clean respirators after each use to remove pesticide residue. Read each pesticide label for the specific requirements for mixer and loader and applicators. There are other PPE items that can be useful for applicators in specific situations. Items like rubber boots for use in turf application situations where you may be walking through the treated area, head covering when making applications above your head like spraying trees or tall vegetation or hanging plants in a greenhouse. After the pesticide application, it is important to properly clean your PPE and yourself. Use soap and water to clean all of your PPE before you store it for the next use. Also, be sure to wash yourself with soap and water as soon as possible after the application. The most important thing to remember about PPE is that you have to use the appropriate equipment for each job. You can purchase these items at many locations. For a list of suppliers, refer to the NEB Guide on protective clothing and equipment for pesticide applicators. As always, remember to read the label for specific PPE requirements for each product.
Some pesticides, which pose breathing hazards, require use of respirators when mixing loading, during application, or when cleaning equipment after application. Repeated, unprotected exposure to these materials can weaken or damage otherwise healthy lungs. This can result in the loss of energy, shortness of breath, a persistent cough, or tightness in the chest. This video addresses how to properly use a respirator when required with some types of pesticide applications. I will cover the requirements for using respirators when pesticide applications require their use, the types of respirators used for pesticide applications, how to conduct a seal test, and how to maintain and store your respirator. Pesticides that require respirators include some insecticides, fungicides, herbicides, and even some organically approved pesticides. But keep in mind that many pesticide products do not require the use of respirators. While this video focuses on respirators, it's a requirement to use all personal protective equipment, or PPE, listed on the pesticide label. In order to determine if a pesticide requires the use of a respirator and during which operations, you must read the Personal Protective Equipment, or PPE, section of the pesticide label you plan on using. This is near the beginning of the label in the precautionary statements section. If there's no mention of a respirator, then none is required. If a respirator is required, you need to select the correct type of respirator. Pesticide labels specify the types of respirators using NIOSH TC designations. Some pesticides only require respirators for some mixing and loading or application activities. With this label, pesticides are required for all pesticide handling activities. It's important to match the correct type of respirator with the pesticide you'll be using, as different respirators protect against different types of products. A common category of respirator is the TC84A, as with this example. This is a particulate filter. These filters are often rated as N, R, or P, referring to their resistance to oil. N is not resistant, R is resistant, and P is highly resistant to oils. The numbers 95, 99, or 100 refer to the percentage of airborne particulates they remove. For example, the respirator on the right is an N95. It removes 95% of the particles, but is not resistant to oils. A TC23C is designed to remove organic vapor contaminants from the air, but you must be sure to use the correct type of cartridge for organic vapors. Some labels will also require a particulate pre-filter when using this type of respirator. These are attached on top of the cartridges. The respirator on the left is an example of this. No one type of filter protects against all types of pesticide contaminants. You should make a list of the pesticide products you'll be using and check for their respirator requirements. Check each label for its PPE requirements. Before anyone can use a respirator, they must have a medical evaluation by a licensed healthcare professional. This is to make sure they can use a respirator while working without putting their health at risk. This must be done before a fit test is conducted and is at no cost to employees. The licensed healthcare provider will provide a written medical determination, and this record must be kept for at least 2 years for each employee. Persons using tight-fitting type respirators must have an annual fit test for each model of respirator they will be using. While powered air purifying respirators do not require an annual fit test, non-powered air purifying respirators require an annual fit test. These respirators must have a tight seal around the face to prevent leaks. Human faces vary in shape and size, and so do models and sizes of respirators. Fit tests ensure that the mask does not leak air when in use. Generally, tight-fitting respirators will work only on clean-shaven faces. Applicators wanting to keep beards and other facial hair should use powered air purifying respirators where a tight seal is not as important. All fit tests must conform to OSHA-approved standards and must be conducted annually. As people age, lose, or gain weight, their faces change in shape, so the sizes and models of respirators that fit their face may change. A written record of the fit test must be kept for at least 2 years and is required to include name of the applicator tested, the type of fit test performed, make, model, and size of respirator approved for the applicator, date of the fit test, and the results of the fit test. Each time a tight-fitting respirator is used, a seal check is done to ensure it is in place correctly. This can be done by blocking the exhalation valve with your hand and breathing out gently, or by covering the inlet openings with the palms of your hand and inhaling gently. If you feel air leaking with either test, reposition the respirator and repeat the steps until you have an effective seal. Remember that facial hair may interfere with the seal and is not permitted with tight-fitting respirators. Remember, a seal check is not the same as a fit test. Fit tests are performed annually. A seal check is done every time you use a tight-fitting respirator. Employers are responsible to train their employees on the proper use and care of their respirators. This is done annually and should include explaining when and why respirators are needed, how to select, install, and when to change cartridges, how to put on, check the seal, and remove respirators, how to recognize what to do if a respirator fails, how to inspect, maintain, and store respirators, and how to recognize medical symptoms that may limit the ability to use a respirator while you are working. Employers must keep records of respirator training for at least 2 years. This should include name of the trainer, name of the trainees, date of the training, and the topics covered during the training. Reusable respirators must be cleaned after each use. Carefully follow the manufacturer's cleaning instructions. Respirators shared by coworkers must be cleaned and disinfected before they can be shared. It's important to thoroughly air dry respirators to prevent mold development before storing them in plastic bags. Respirators should be stored in a clean, dry place away from sunlight and extreme temperatures. Respirators have a working lifespan that can vary with the environment they're used in. In general, particulate filtering respirators must be replaced when resistance to breathing becomes excessive, when the filtering elements are damaged or torn, according to the manufacturer's instructions, according to pesticide labeling, or at the end of 8 hours of cumulative use. With respirators that remove gas or organic vapors, the cartridges must be replaced at the first indication of taste, odor, or irritation, when resistance to breathing becomes excessive, according to the manufacturer's instructions, according to pesticide labeling, or at the end of 8 hours of cumulative use. For more information on respirator reuse, I would recommend you get a copy of the Worker Protection Standard Respiratory Protection Guide available through PERC. the Pesticide Education Resources Collaborative.
Good day, everyone. My name's Tad Campbell. I'm the Agriculture Natural Resource Agent in Mason County. With me is Philip Konopka, the Agriculture Natural Resource Agent in Lewis County. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the requirements for pesticide record keeping for private applicators. Record keeping is a very important part of the process as a private applicator. Those records that we keep are a tool for us to be able to go back and review on rates and various things like that and what type of response we got with those. But they're also a tool to make sure that we're in compliance, and if there is a problem with someone where you are going to get a visit with the Kentucky Department of Agriculture, that tool is also to provide that you followed the label and followed the protocols on how to apply that product properly. So in the next series of slides, we're going to try to work together and get through those slides to give you a little bit more information on proper record keeping for the private applicator pesticide applicators.
Well, let's take a good deep dive into it, Tad. Let's take a look and see what we got.
Sounds good. Well, Philip, first question that we're going to run into today is why keep records for pesticide applications?
Well, that's a great question, Tad, and we can use it for our past practices because what you sprayed on that crop this year may be fresh in your mind now, but you get 2, 3, 4 years down the road, you have a problem. You may want to go back and look at it and forget what you put on there. So for IPM practices, we can improve our insect, disease, and weed control, avoid problems. I know if anybody's raising a crop of soybeans up in this area, we've got mare's tail, palmer, and water hemp that are causing us problems. So let's try to avoid future problems. And then at the end of the day, what we're doing for work is to improve our profits.
Great, great. And, above all, outside of the effectiveness of the product that we're using, what products do we have available in our area? Because that is a big variation when you start talking, other locations in the state, other states and things like that, because these labels are state dependent. So some chemicals that producers are using in other states aren't actually labeled or approved for Kentucky and things like that. But the big thing with why we keep records is if there is a complaint, wherever that may come from, that record proves that you followed the protocol set forth in that label so that you did the things that you were supposed to do correctly, and tries, it's just a tool to our toolbox to be able to prove that we did things right, and things like that.
The records are kind of like the crest wrench in your toolbox. There's many jobs available for that tool if the need arises.
Correct. And of course, it's the law. We have to keep records. It's the law, and there's no way that we can get around it. So that's a good overview of why we actually keep records for pesticide applications. And let's get a little bit further into it as far as what is required on those records, okay?
So what is required, Tad?
Well, when we start looking at what's required, there's several state and federal groups that require certain things to be on that pesticide application record. And they vary as far as time that you have to keep those records and things like that. So let's get a little bit more in depth in what each one of these groups requires, and how long it is required by that group, and overall what we have to kind of follow to be in compliance. So USDA requires that private applicators must keep records for all restricted use pesticides for 2 years. The EPA, which is part of the Worker Protection Standards, requires that all records of pesticide applications be kept for 2 years. So not only are they requiring restricted use, in addition to they also are requiring general use chemicals as well too. So when you start looking at it, that both sides of both sides of the gamut have to be recorded when we apply those pesticides. Now, the caveat to the whole thing is that the Kentucky state law requires that private and commercial applicators keep records for 3 years following pesticide applications. With that number being more restrictive than the federal guidelines, here in Kentucky, we have to keep our pesticide records for a minimum 3 years. If we don't do that, then we're not compliant. So even though USDA and EPA only require 2-year length of keeping those records, it's really important that Kentucky applicators are keeping those records for a minimum of 3 years.
Don't forget, the USDA and Kentucky Department of Agriculture have legal access to those records.
Correct.
So if they come knocking, you have to provide those.
Correct, and we want to be a willing participation with those groups if they do come asking for our records. So yes, that is really important to know as well too. So hopefully that'll clear up the timeline on how we have to keep, or how long we have to keep records, since different groups require different lengths of holding those records. So when it's all said and done, the one that's the most restrictive, which is the 3 years for Kentucky applicators, is the one that we have to follow.
Correct.
Okay, Philip, what are the record-keeping requirements for the USDA as far as it goes to private applicator records, pesticide records?
Great question, Tad. They're going to want to know several different pieces of information. We're going to want to know the brand name or the product name that's being applied, the EPA registration number. We'll need that information as well. Date, and we need to know month, day, and even year needs to be applied, because like you said earlier, we need to keep these records for 3 years. If you don't put the year down, we can get kind of confused. Location, where are we putting this product down at? What crop are we spraying? And it may be something like a stored product, like stored grain, or it could be a field. Size of the area treated can be in acres. Maybe we've got a high tunnel, need to do a little smaller application. It may come down to square feet. Total amount of product applied. We need to know who applied it and the certification number of that person that applied it.
It's a lot of information just from one organization, but that information is really vital to make sure that if we do have problems with the efficacy of the product that we're using, we've got that information in hand to be able to track that back, as well as the information that we need to know where we put that, how long it took us to get it there, all that good stuff. So a lot of information from that one organization that's required, but nonetheless, some really vital information when it comes to our pesticide records.
All right, Tad, now we've talked about USDA restrictions. How about EPA requirements?
The EPA and the Worker Protection Standards programs do require information as well as part of our record-keeping process. And some of it's the same type of information that the USDA requires. However, there's a little bit that is going to be a little different, or additional information that we need to supply to our records. And in this slide, the bold printed areas are going to be our additional things that need to be recorded on those records, so that we are in compliance with both USDA and the EPA Worker Protection Standards. USDA and EPA both require brand name of the product and the EPA registration number. USDA requires the date of application, but EPA Worker Protection Standards requires the date and time of the application. Location of the application is required by both EPA and USDA. But in addition, EPA and Worker Protection Standards wants to know the active ingredient and the restricted entry interval for that particular product, and they want you to make sure that that's on the records as well. So it's really important that we get all the information we need from both of those entities on our records, so that we're in compliance on for both sectors.
Now, you said a very interesting term there, Tad, restricted entry interval, or REI. And basically what that is after we do the application, how long is it safe before we can go back in? If we have to get in before that time, we've got to suit back up with all our personal protective equipment.
Correct. And all the labels, all the products that you're going to apply to your crops in the labeling have an agriculture use section. And in that section, it will list the REI. And basically, that is correct. If you've not exhausted that time frame that's listed for that particular chemical, you have to go back into that field with all the required PPE that was required to actually apply that product as well too. Good information. Okay, Phil. So the USDA, the EPA Worker Protection Standards have a detailed list of record-keeping requirements that private applicators must make sure that they get in their records when they're completing those. What do producers in the state of Kentucky have to add or be aware of to be compliant as a Kentucky private applicator?
Don't think they have to add anything. The state of Kentucky requires the same thing as the EPA and the USDA. However, the state of Kentucky does require that the person get it down on paper within 14 days.
Okay, so as an applicator, to be compliant with Kentucky state law, I should have that record completed after application within 14 days, correct?
Correct. And then you need to hold that record for 3 years to be compliant with the state of Kentucky. Now, let's say, for an example, Tad, that you're extremely busy, that busy time of year, and it's hard to get all over everything, and you need to spray, and you need to spray now. So you contact the local feed store to custom spray for you. What's required from that standpoint?
Well, I think, as a farm owner that's requesting commercial applications, I want to make sure that I record the name and address of the person that is providing the service.
Sure.
But as an entity, if I was the commercial applicator, I need the name and the address of the person that I'm doing the service for as well too. So I think there needs to be some interchange there as far as information goes, because as a farm owner, I need to know that that person is certified to be able to commercially apply products, which I would assume being coming from a commercial applicating outfit, that would be the case. But it's always good to have the name and contact of the person applying anything on your farm. The reason for that is that entity that's commercially applying products to your farm has up to 30 days of the application to get you back a detailed record for your records, so that you can complete a record on that application for your farm. So if there was a chance that someone came looking for that information within that 30 days, you still have that applicator's name and contact information, which will help you through the record process at the time, even though you're still waiting on that completed record for within that 30-day period.
Yeah, that's an excellent idea, to make sure we have that information so we can fall back onto it.
Right. And ultimately, our goal is to provide the best records that we can as private applicators. And by having as much information, even if it's more information than we actually need, but by having as much information as we possibly can have, that will help us stay compliant in our record keeping process. Okay, Phil. As you can see, we have a template pesticide record keeping form that producers could use. I say template because I don't think that there is a required certain form that you can use, as long as producers are recording the proper information and all the information that they need to have a complete and compliant record. They can do it on a notebook or anything like that. But UK has actually put this form together, and it actually has the headings to allow producers the opportunity to record all the necessary information that they would need to have a compliant record after a pesticide application.
Yeah, I agree, Tad. This is an excellent form to have on hand. It goes over field number or name, goes over the date of application, along with the day, month, and year, who applied it and their number, what crop or treated area, the size of the area, the product name, the registration number can be put on there, total amount applied, and I love this rate per acre. We've got the per acre, or we've got a blank. If it's smaller than an acre, or an acre doesn't apply to what we're going after, we can fill in that blank as well. volume of water, how much we apply per acre, and that's going to vary depending on what pesticide we put out. The purpose of the application, we need to remember why we're spraying. We don't want to spray just to simply say we sprayed. Whether it's a general or restricted use, the REI, we talked about that earlier, very important. We can write that down. If we write it down, we're more likely to remember it. The time we did it, and then the active ingredient. And I think we're going to fix and take a deep dive and kind of explain each of these topics.
Yeah, we do have a little bit of a scenario so that we can kind of go through the process of completing this particular form. We do still want to let everyone know that this form is not a required form. It's just a template to help producers or applicators get all the vital information that is required on paper to have a compliant record. So with saying so, we're going to move into a example scenario, and then we are going to discuss how to complete each section of the form. Okay, well, let's take a look at this example. We're going to be using a chemical that is non-existent. It's a facetious type chemical. So we're going to use the label that we have that was supplied to us by our entomologist specialist to use this as an example. A lot of the chemicals, a lot of the labels, the chemical labels that we use from year to year actually can change each year. With updates and things like that. So in this scenario, with it not being an actual chemical, we can use this in our teaching efforts from year to year and not have to worry about things being outdated and possibly get producers in a situation where they're not applying the right amount of a product if we were using just a common name type label for our scenario. So I wanted to make everybody aware up front that it is a false name. It actually does not exist. So, but anyways, we're gonna assume that this is our situation. It's truly kind of an everyday occurrence that we're gonna walk through. So today we're gonna be treating a 10-acre cornfield for stink bug problems. We're gonna use a low rate application of Blastum 2EC. Okay.
It's going to take us about 4 hours to do the job, and you used a total of 200 gallons of diluted spray. When you get finished, it's going to be about 7 p.m., and you're going to use the Blastum to control the stink bugs.
So what we're going to do is we're going to walk through the template that we just showed everyone on how to get all the accurate information that we need from a pesticide label to provide a compliant record for a pesticide application.
I think you brought up a good point. Even if you use the same chemical year after year after year, which you probably shouldn't from a pest management standpoint, but take a glance at those labels each year, because you brought up a very good point that they can change small details every year.
Correct. And those registrations with the states, we talked earlier in our presentation that all chemicals aren't registered in each state. So sometimes there are emergency applications where a chemical can be used in a state under an emergency label, and other situations as well too. But it is really important that we rely back to chemical labels every year, especially when we buy new products each time, because each time we buy that new product, there could be some minor changes with the labeling as it's set forth from year to year for our applications.
All right, Tad. So we've got our Blastum 2EC label here. We've pulled out some very important detailed information that we need for our example.
Right. If you look, you'll see that we have the product label, the container label on the left-hand side of the slide, and then we pulled out a couple excerpts of the labeling materials that were within the package on the right-hand side. And those particular locations in that labeling information are going to give us the information that we need to be able to complete our record and make sure that it's compliant with USDA, EPA Worker Protection Standards, and Kentucky laws.
All right, so let's take a look at what we got here. We're going to pull out our fancy dancy laser pointer. Field number. We particularly said BF1. Now, does that mean that every field's going to be called BF1? No. I want you to name that something that you're going to remember for at least 3 years. Remember, we got to keep these records for 3 years. Data application. We did our treatment on March 24th of 2021. Go over to applicator name and certification number. James Henry did the spraying. There's his application number. And we treated corn. The size of the area, if you remember the example, said 10 acres.
So when we continue to work ourselves across that line to get the information that we want, it's asking for the product name, and we're using Blastum 2EC. The EPA registration number, we do not want to make that or mistake that for the establishment number that's on a lot of products. It should say EPA registration number.
That's a very easy mistake to do, so make sure you do get the correct number.
That is true. So make sure that you're recording the EPA registration number, and for this product it was 12-346-67. And on this product, it said that we were using a low rate, and when we refer back to some of our materials, we'll show you in just a little bit of where we got this information, but it was 2.1 ounce per acre was low rate, and we did 10 acres, so that gives us 21 total ounces of the product that we're going to apply on these 10 acres, okay? So we're going to continue on with that, and if you look, here's the trade name that we used, the Blastum 2EC. It asks for the registration number, which is here. This is the EPA establishment number. We do not want that. We want the EPA registration number, which was 12-345-67 instead of, I messed up and put a 6, I think, in that. So I'll have to redo my record. But that was the basic information that we needed at that point in time. Go ahead, Phil.
Keep in mind that the registration number is identified for each individual product. No two products have the same registration number.
Correct. So it's kind of like a thumbprint of the chemical world.
It is.
Your fingerprint of the...
Before you move on, Tad, make sure you pointed to restricted use pesticide, because we'll need to know that too.
We'll need to know that as well. So this is a restricted use pesticide, and we'll show you where that goes on the record keeping form as well too. But we also we're discussing rates, and when we started looking at the rates, the actual range for this product for the low end is going to be 2.1 to 6.4 ounces. We are treating stink bugs, which is listed on here, and what we want, and it's for field corn as well. So we did use the 2.1, and that's where we came up with our 2.1 ounces of product per acre to get our total 21 ounces for the application as a whole.
Correct. And our example specifically stated the low rate. That's why we went with the 2.1. If you stay within those ranges, you're abiding by the label, which it means you're abiding by the law.
Okay, so as we continue to move across our form for our record, we go back to the volume of water or carrier per acre, and in the scenario, it said that we used 200 total gallons over 10 acres, so an easy math equation, and we came up with 20 gallons per acre on that. We know that we're treating for stink bugs, and as we pointed out in the last the slide before the last slide, that it is a restricted use pesticide. So we're going to mark our R for our restricted use pesticide.
Now, Tad, you got REI for 12 hours. I don't remember seeing that on the earlier label.
And it was not, it was in the very first set of labels that we said we were going to use that. This is going to come from your agricultural use section of your label, and the following slide will show a picture of that. So we'll be able to show everyone where we actually found that in the labeling information itself. There's always that agriculture use box, and it has some information in there, but one of the most important things is the REI in that box. So the other thing that we kind of calculated is that in our scenario, we finished up at 7 p.m. We knew it took us 4 hours to apply the product over those 10 acres. So we were basically applying product between 3 p.m. and 7 p.m. And if we refer back to the main label, we'll take a look at that in just a little bit, but this is the active ingredient, dualthrin. So again, a lot of this stuff is made up from a product situation, but it still correlates to what we're seeing on actual labels that products that we're using. So let's take a look at the main label again, and here's where we find the active ingredient. It always lists the active ingredient, and we've got dualthrin there at 25.1%, and then other ingredients are 74.9% to come up with a total of 100% of this product. Now, we're also going to take a look at the agricultural use area as well, but before we do that,
look up there at the corner, Tad, at the 3A. That's a group, okay? We've got them broke down by herbicide, insecticide, and fungicides. If those numbers are different, we're using a different mode of action. If those numbers are the same, that means we're using the same mode of action. Let's take herbicides, for example, glyphosate. There is a million products that have glyphosate as the active ingredient. Maybe totally different names, such as Roundup Power Max, Mad Dog Plus, Touchdown. All of those are glyphosate products, but different names. So in order for IPM management, we want to rotate chemicals, so make sure we're not just using a different chemical, but a different chemistry type, a mode of action.
Correct. So basically what you're saying, Philip, is we need to look at that group number, and we need to rotate group numbers in our purchasing scenarios so that we're buying chemicals that do the job we need done, but have different group numbers so that it breaks up the possible of resistance of weeds to a particular group category that we would continually use time after time.
I don't see any new chemicals coming down the pipe, so we need to make sure we can get what we have on our toolbox effective for several years to come.
I agree totally. And we're seeing a lot more resistance each year, it seems like, with the chemicals that we have at hand. And again, if that is not increasing in number of new chemicals, we need to make sure that we're trying to limit the amount of resistance that we'll see in those chemicals that we have for our use right now. This is the agricultural use requirement box that we were talking about earlier. As you can see, here's the REI of 12 hours that we needed for our record keeping. And again, all your REIs can be found in the agricultural use requirement, along with a lot of other vital information. But the record does require us to put the REI in there if it does have a specified REI.
Correct, yeah. That makes sure if you have to enter the field before that REI is up, you have to resuit up with the proper protective equipment.
Correct. So now we've taken each section of our template for our record keeping to provide the information that we need for each one of the headings to make a complete record that is compliant to USDA, EPA, Worker Protection Standards, and Kentucky standards to meet those record requirements.
And there's multiple lines here. Every time that you do a pesticide application, we need to write it down. If you do a tank mix, meaning that you add more chemicals in than just one, there is room, as you can see right here, for product names that we can add our tank mixes here. We don't have to fill out an individual line per se for every chemical, but for every application, we need to have everything listed.
Correct. So just make sure you get that information down each time that you're applying something to your farm, and also make sure that you're recording that within 14 days. You're keeping those records for 3 years, and that you are taking down all the vital information, no matter what your record template looks like, that you're getting all the information that's required by all those groups to be compliant with your record.
And keep in mind, the Kentucky Department of Agriculture has the right to see these records. So as farmers, we want to be compliant. We want to have everything ready to go for if they do show up.
I agree. Thank you guys for taking time out and gaining a little bit more information about the proper information that needs to be completed for your private applicator pesticide records. And hopefully the templates and the information in this presentation will help you be able to find those things as you move forward and provide those applications as needed on the farm.
Hi, I'm Erin Bauer, Extension Associate in the Pesticide Safety Education Office at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Improper pesticide storage can be hazardous to human health and the environment. Follow these guidelines for storing pesticides safely and securely. Store pesticides in locked, well-ventilated locations away from water, such as lakes or streams. Post danger signs and secure your building to keep unauthorized people out. Buy only what you need and don't stockpile. Always use your oldest pesticides first. Keep an inventory of stored pesticide products, as this will help in your decision making. Store pesticides in their original containers and out of reach of children. So this means do not put them into things like soda containers or things like that that children might be attracted to. Store other materials such as food, feed, or supplies separately from where pesticides are stored so that these items do not get contaminated from pesticides. Keep and follow all of your pesticide labels, as these can indicate temperature requirements or storage requirements for the pesticides. Make sure that your storage facility is kept neat and has sturdy shelves, metal works really well, and that they don't leak. Put liquid and more toxic pesticides on lower shelves, as this will help in case there's a spill. So for instance, we have a skull and crossbones poison labeled pesticide here that's on the bottom floor. So if that would spill, it wouldn't go very far. Also, you want to keep like your granular pesticides, those can be kept higher up, and then your liquid pesticides on a lower shelf. By following these guidelines, you will be able to protect yourself and the environment from pesticide spills.
My name is Rick Besson. I'm an extension entomologist at the University of Kentucky. I'm in the entomology department, and I work with farmers across the state. Pollinators face a lot of threats when it comes to their numbers. Generally, we feel that pollinators have declined over the last decade or more. We notice that with farmers having to bring in managed pollinators more than they used to, just because they can't rely on the wild pollinators as much. The reasons for these declines can be a number of things. It can be pathogens affecting managed and wild pollinators. It can be pesticides. It can be changes in weather and climate. There's a number of factors that can be contributing to this, but we rely on pollinators, and in an era where pollinators are less reliable, that creates a lot of issues for farmers. It's just as important to conserve wild pollinators as it is to rely on managed pollinators. We have a very diverse state. We're fortunate in our state. We have a lot of areas around our agricultural fields where there usually are numerous wild pollinators. Wild pollinators can pollinate a wide variety of plants and crops. They're very valuable. But with wild pollinator decline, farmers are relying more heavily on bringing in managed pollinators for specific crops. This creates some issues in terms of expense for the growers, as well as the availability of managed pollinators at specific times of the year.
Much time is spent selecting the most efficient product for crop protection. However, spray nozzles are a cheap component that may be as important as the products being sprayed. Proper selection of a nozzle type is essential to maximize application efficacy and to minimize off-target movement. Understanding simple concepts can get you a long way. At the end of this video, you should be able to: first, rapidly identify key features of common spray nozzles. Second, consult a nozzle manufacturer catalog. Third, understand how to get good coverage and reduce drift. Nozzles come in a wide variety of sizes and shapes. A universal alphanumeric code is adopted among manufacturers. This code provides rapid identification of key features. In this case, XR indicates the extended range series of TJET. The first three numbers indicate the angle of the spray fan, which is 110 degrees in this example. The two last numbers indicate the output at 40 psi. The output of this nozzle is 0.04 gallons per minute. V indicates it obeys a color coding system. Different colors indicate different outputs. S indicates the nozzle orifice is stainless steel. When it comes to spray patterns, the one-stage flat fans are still very common in agricultural applications. For decades, these were the only option on the market. However, one-stage nozzles present a huge problem, which is the combination of both fine and coarse droplets in the spray. As observed here, when the pressure increases from 40 to 60 psi, fine droplets show up at the edge of the pattern. Fine droplets can become suspended in the air and are the major cause of off-target movement due to particle drift. Two-stage nozzles, also called pre-orifice nozzles, introduce a smaller orifice prior to the exit orifice. This new feature allows a more stable pattern and reduces drift. A good example of a two-stage option is the air induction design. The pre-orifice allows for mixing air with the spraying solution, creating a coarser droplet spectrum. Coarser droplets, as seen here, drastically reduce the off-target movement of the product. Manufacturers' catalogs and phone apps provide valuable information for each nozzle type. Before utilizing these resources, consult your extension agent to determine the proper product rate, pressure, and speed for your application. These catalogs can be a good guide for nozzle selection. Suppose that you want to perform a herbicide application at 8 miles per hour with 20 inches between the nozzles in a boom. In order to achieve an output of 14.9 gallons per minute in this application, an XR 11004 would be adequate. Notice that changes in pressure do not linearly correlate with output. In other words, you will not double the gallons per acre output if you double your pressure. If you need to change the output of an application, consider changing the speed and even the nozzle type before working in wider ranges of pressure. Each product may require a specific nozzle type. For Fusarium head blight control, you should consider utilizing twin fans, which can protect both sides of the wheat head with fungicide. Drift from dicamba has been one of the major causes of injury to soybeans in the past few years. Dicamba labels were subjected to major changes and currently only allow nozzles that produce very coarse to ultra-coarse droplet sizes. The TJET TTI and Wilger DG are examples of approved nozzles for dicamba applications. Most applications require achieving a balance between good coverage and reduced off-target movement. Nozzles that produce fine and very fine droplets can increase coverage, but they also increase the risk of drift. Good coverage is mandatory for fungicidal applications and contact herbicides. In contrast, systemic products such as the herbicide Roundup are dependent on quality coverage to achieve control. Always consult product labels and your extension agent for specifics. In summary, remember what the color and the shape of a nozzle can tell you. Always refer to manufacturer catalogs and specialists. and consider the balance between coverage and off-target movement to maximize application efficacy.
Welcome to Pestibites from the National Pesticide Information Center at Oregon State University.
This is Amy, and I'm here again with Brittany. Brittany, should clothes that have pesticides on them be washed with the household laundry?
Clothes that have pesticides should be stored and washed separately to avoid contamination to other clothes.
Doesn't the washing process remove the pesticides from clothes?
Well, it depends. If clothes are worn during an application, a few wash cycles will remove most of the pesticides. However, if they were soaked with a pesticide, they should be thrown away rather than placed in the laundry.
Why is it important to remove pesticides from clothes?
Pesticide products can rub off of the clothes and onto your skin. This exposure could continue as long as the clothing is being worn. In some cases, that's 10 to 14 hours. This contact can be minimized through proper washing and drying of work clothes after each and every pesticide application.
Thanks, Brittany.
You're welcome.
Pestibites are brought to you by the National Pesticide Information Center, a cooperative agreement between Oregon State University and the Environmental Protection Agency.
Well, good day, everyone. My name's Philip Knock. I'm the County Ag Agent over in Lewis County. And with me today is Tad Campbell, the Mason County Ag Agent. We're going to have a deep discussion on pesticide update and safety. But before we get started, I got to give credit to Dr. Rick Besson with the University of Kentucky with the help of this presentation. So, as we start talking about what's in the news of pesticides, safety always comes up. And then we get the question, well, how dangerous is it? Well, over in Hawaii, they took 8,000 pesticide users. So stop and think about that. 8,000 pesticide users. That's a pretty big number. Over 34 years, not just 1 or 2 years, but 34 years of data, and conducted a study with Japanese men. And out of that 8,000, 45% of those had a higher risk for heart attack. It's alarming, isn't it? It is. Stop and think about those numbers. The odds are pretty good that if you're using pesticides in that study, that you're going to have some sort of health repercussions a little bit later on in life.
As it goes with your heart. I mean, really important in Oregon that we need, we want to maintain it, all that good stuff. And, throughout this entire presentation with our pesticide certification, we've tried to continue to emphasize personal protective equipment. I'll get it out there in a second, but personal protective equipment is really important as us as applicators to maintain our health and safety. And we have gone over and over and over the importance of those particular things, where they're going to be found on the label, the importance of knowing what each one of those are, just a multitude of different things. But if this doesn't kind of open your eye to why we want to protect ourselves as applicators, I don't really know what would.
No, and everybody likes shortcuts. Everybody takes shortcuts, but personal protective equipment is not one shortcut we can take. It's on there for a very specific reason.
I agree. And those are minimums that they put on there.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you don't have to be fully seated on certain chemicals and things like that. It only requires it. We really don't want to worry about what the weather is outside. We want to be seated to be able to mix and apply those particular chemicals. So definitely this is an eye-opener. Hopefully it is for those of you that are listening to this presentation. But yes, your safety is our concern as well as it should be your concern. And following that PPE will help mitigate some of those risks involved with mixing, loading, unloading, applying all the processes that we have to undergo when we're applying these chemicals to our farm.
Most of our pesticide applicators are farmers that we work with on a daily basis. And speaking for both of us, we want to work with you for several years to come. So please take care of yourself and make sure you use that equipment.
Definitely.
So, pesticide poisoning symptoms. We live in the age right now where there's a certain disease that we know a lot of symptoms about. But when we get to pesticide, sweating and fever, nausea, vomiting, skin irritation can be a result of exposure to pesticides.
Right. And you know, granted, you mentioned we're in an age right now where, you know, a lot of the symptoms that are out there for the virus that's caused the pandemic coincide with a lot of normal day-to-day things that we have, you know, sinus problems, flu, like, you know, just a common flu, a common cold. So there's a lot of things that overlap. And that's why I was kind of talking about the leather shoes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, 3 or 4 days down the road, you're not going to be thinking about, if you're showing some of these symptoms, that it's pesticide exposure. However, that's what it could be, and not realize it, because you've already done that. You've checked the box off on Monday for that. Now it's Thursday, and you're not thinking about that anymore. You've already done everything you thought was right on Monday, and now you're experiencing some of these things, and it could be as a result of just exposure to that because you spilled a little bit on your shoes and didn't realize it.
Mm-hmm.
So you know, this list really basically coincides with a lot of different things out there.
It does, and especially now, if you've experienced any of these symptoms after using a pesticide, seek medical attention right away.
Rule of thumb is to assume that it's pesticide exposure so that you can rule it out rather than not, and then it become a more of a problem than it would be if you would have tried that in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the best
right.
way of kind of handling that is start with it being, you know, yes, I've been exposed, and then rule that out before you move on to something else as far as the cause of some of these symptoms that you would be having.
Oh, I agree wholeheartedly with you on that one. So first aid. Let's talk a little bit about first aid. And there will be a section on that label that deals specifically with first aid. Something like skin exposure. Recognize the signs of pesticide poisoning. The sooner you realize that you've been exposed to the pesticide on the skin, wash it off just as quick as you can with soap and water.
Right. And have some of these things there just in case.
Mm-hmm.
You know, have some eye rinse. Have a gallon of just regular distilled or drinking water there so that you can dilute anything that may get on your skin or something like that. It's much better to have it there and not need it than not have it there and need it. So just have it there just in case, because the quicker you can get that diluted and rinsed off of your body, the less likely you are to have higher risk associated with exposure from that particular product. So kind of keep that in mind as you're preparing to do your spraying all season long.
Sure, and it's not a bad idea to keep a change of clothes in the truck either. Sometimes if you get contaminated enough, the best option is just dispose of what you've spilled everything on.
I agree. And, you know, a lot of people may be a little modest about trying to change clothes, you know, out in the field or something like that, but it's a whole lot better getting that chemical soaked clothing off of you and changing clothes than it is to worry about, you know, what somebody's thinking that you're doing out there in the field, changing those clothes and things like that. Because it definitely could be the difference between how severe your symptoms get if you can get as much of that away from your body as possible moving forward.
If you inhale pesticides, or if you're with somebody that inhaled a pesticide, make sure that you're under protection before you go in and save them. Our first instinct is, I've got to save my brother, my dad, my friend, whoever it is. But don't you become a victim in the process. Make sure that you've got a respirator on or something like that to protect you so that you can help them.
Very true. Very true. You know, your first thought is provide help that's needed and things like that. But if you put yourself in jeopardy as well, then there could be multiple victims rather than just dealing with the one that is at hand at that particular point in time. Another thing to maybe mention too is that as applicators, as farmers, we're pretty independent. Usually, we're a one-person show when it comes to doing these type of things. Anytime that you are going to be handling, mixing, spraying pesticides, I highly, highly recommend that you make someone else aware of it. Let someone else know that you're going to such and such area or such and such farm to be able to apply these products, and let them know where that label is so that they can find out what that first aid or the first part of that first aid response would be if you did get exposure. Because sometimes with these chemicals, if we get exposed, we're incapacitated and can't physically do anything for ourselves. So we're relying upon someone else. And the more people that know what you're using and where you're at, things like that, the better off you would be if you did become exposed to some of these products.
Sure, and if you come up with somebody that is exposed that's having problems, after you make sure that you're safe to enter, get that victim to fresh air just as quick as possible, immediately. If they've got some tight-fitting clothing on, you need to loosen that up. If breathing stops, you may have to induce CPR. If a lot of these sprayers are tall in high places, so if the chemical doesn't take you out, the fall may hurt you pretty bad too. So we want to try to protect them from falling if possible.
Correct.
And then keep them. This part can be very tricky. Keep them calm and keep them quiet while you seek medical attention. Some people like to panic, and it's hard to get them back under control.
And if you think about it, if you are in a panic state, your adrenaline and your blood's pumping a lot faster, so you're actually adding more of that exposure throughout your body through just a normal response to a situation at hand. So definitely some good tips there from a first aid situation from inhaled pesticides. When we deal with swallowed pesticides, first off, I don't think there's a pesticide out there that's not harmful if swallowed.
I agree with you on that.
I will say that. But as far as how we deal with a swallowed pesticide is definitely something we have to refer to the label, because there's probably as many labels that say don't induce vomiting as there are that do say induce vomiting. So never induce vomiting if the victim is unconscious or convulsing.
True.
That just makes another situation out of the situation currently in hand. And you never induce vomiting of a corrosive insecticide.
Sure. I mean, that can cause more damage coming back up
yes.
than it would if it was just in your stomach. A good way to do that is to dilute these with either milk or water. I was listening to Dr. Besson, and he said always have a can of condensed milk in your toolbox. And I didn't understand why. But if the case were it was ingested, we can use the milk to dilute it.
Or if we've got that gallon of drinking water that we are going to use to wash it off our skin, we may need to be drinking that gallon to help reduce the amount of concentration in that ingested insecticide at that point in time or pesticide.
As a rule of thumb, any pesticide that's an EC or in a solution formulation don't induce the vomiting. I mean, that's just a rule of thumb. To always check the SDS label in the first aid, but that's a good rule of thumb to have in the back of your mind.
And that's another reason why it's good to have multiple people know what you're doing and where you're at, so that they can read the label and know what you need to do if you're not able to do so yourself too. So definitely some good things to know when we're dealing with applications from a first aid situation.
So now we've talked about some of the potential things. First aid kits. Those are always nice to have. It's kind of like life insurance. It's nice to have, but I'm not really anxious to use it.
Right. And I think a lot of things that we are talking about in this presentation are things that we hope we never have to use.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's one of those situations where you plan for the grim or the dark of the situation and hope for the best.
Sure.
But when you start looking at a first aid kit, here's some pretty important items to have along in that first aid kit. Gloves, chemical type gloves.
Yeah, I was going to say,
not just gloves, but we want chemical resistant gloves in our first aid kit.
Change of clothes. If we dump a bunch of chemicals on us, we want to make sure we can get that off of us very quickly and have a clean change of clothes to get into.
And if we can't, if we don't have that change of clothes, if we've got some of those disposable Tyvek coveralls, that's our change of clothes at that point.
Sure.
We don't have to have street clothes on. We can get in that Tyvek suit until we get back to where we can change clothes again. Emergency blanket. Sometimes if you're incapacitated with these products, your body's going to shiver and things like that. So having a blanket on hand. Several bottles of clean water.
Yeah, we may be at a farm or something like that doesn't have a clean water available,
or any access to clean water. So we need to make sure that we're providing that on site or on person at all times. Activated charcoal,
always good to have around.
It can help dilute or change the reaction to some of these chemicals. You mentioned the can of evaporated milk. Not many people would have thought about that, but that's a small package that's easily packed, and we can have it at our side if needed.
And it has a very long shelf life.
Right. So you could buy one for a year or two, and it would be good. Several bottles of eye wash. Our eyes are really important to us, and the sooner we can get that chemical that may get contact or exposure with our eyes, we need to make sure that we get that diluted and out as soon as possible.
Sealable bags may become important that we have to put some stuff in, especially if we're keeping some of our first aid kit clean and safe. We can put them in those sealable bags and they're not accidentally exposed to anything.
Sure.
Single-use paper towels. Always keep a roll in the truck myself, but it's nice to have those to help contain the spill. Don't want anything reusable. I want something I can use once and throw away.
And they help wipe it off your skin after you've used your gallon of water to dry your skin off in case the air temperature's a little cool or something like that. So a lot of uses for our paper towels. Simple bandages,
scrapes, cuts, they all happen.
We do that all the time. I mean, a lot of times when we're trying to fix a particular part of a piece of equipment or something like that, we'll scratch a finger or something.
Sure, that wrench slips every now and then.
But if you have that exposure on those open sores, it's quickly taken into your body. So definitely we want to cut down the quickness of the absorption if we possibly can.
And in dish soap, always have a good bottle of dish soap running around. And you want to make sure that you're washing underneath free-flowing water. You don't want to rinse your hands in a bucket or anything like that because you just made your bucket contaminated and you just reinfecting yourself. So you always want to make sure it's underneath free-flowing water.
And again, a lot of us would look at this list and say, that's overkill or something like that. But it's kind of like having four-wheel drive when you're out on the back 40 of the farm checking cows. If you're in a two-wheel drive truck and you hit a wet spot and you get hung up and it's a mile and a half back to the tractor. But if you have a button and you push four-wheel drive and you just pull right on out of it, I kind of look at this kit kind of being the same thing.
Sure.
You don't use four-wheel drive unless you need it, but it's nice to have if you need it. Same thing with these first aid kits.
If you don't have everything together and an emergency happens, you won't know where to look. You're going to hit panic mode and you will not know where to go in the house and find everything. So you need to have everything in a central location, easy access, ready to go at an instant.
I agree. Because the last thing on our mind is where's this stuff at? If it's right there and we can open a box and it's all right there, we'll probably use a lot of it. But if we're trying to find it, we may become too exposed to be able to continue to look for certain things too. So having it all there is really, really important.
So pesticide hazard, the risk equals exposure plus toxicity. And basically that means the more exposure or the more toxic it is, the higher the risk. Applicators working with concentrates, when they're mixing it, that's going to be our highest chance of getting exposed to a high dose of pesticide.
let's take a look at the pictures here. You got the mixers, the containers, everything's touching or it's inside. We really want to have a space when we're mixing our chemicals so that we don't have a chance for backwash. We want to have that air pocket space so that we cut down on the potential splash or concentration of spills and things like that.
The air gap is a backflow preventer.
Right.
If you purchase a backflow preventer on the farm, that's going to be an expensive venture to get into.
Correct.
This is cheap. I like cheap that works.
Yes. So make sure that you are when you're mixing that you do provide that air gap so that you cut down on the chances of backsplash and different things like that. If we look at the system to the right there, where they're spraying the trees, those sprayers are very convenient and do a good job for what you're doing. Now, if you take a gander at the applicator on the tractor,
he's not wearing a mask.
He's not wearing a whole lot of protective gear to try to cover his skin or his face or many things at all. I believe he's got short sleeves on. It's hard to tell from that particular picture. But if you look at the droplets that are coming out of that particular unit, they're going to be fairly fine. It's almost like a fogging or a mist type situation. And a change of wind direction is going to cover that applicator in a matter of seconds. And is that going to be enough to cause a problem? We don't know the product that they're spraying. We don't, it could be water for all all we know at this point in time. But this particular setup is similar to some of the pull behind fan sprayers that we use for our pastures in this area.
Yeah, this particular one's an air blast sprayer used in an orchard, and it's very good at covering trees. That's what we need it for in an orchard. But like you said, Tad, it's a fine mist that's going to travel in the air, and if the wind shifts,
correct,
who knows where it's going?
Right. And the similar type sprayers that we use for our pastures, the fan sprayers that throw the 30-foot spread fan, outside the tug along behind piece of equipment, your wind current's usually one direction, so you're good going one way, but when you turn around and come back the other way, then you probably have the wind at a disfavorable position, either to your back or crossing you or something like that. So it's really important when we're using any kind of spray system to be fully clothed in the correct PPE. Sure. And again, we're not saying he's not. We're just saying that most PPE require some type of face protection, eye protection, and long sleeves at the least.
Sure.
And gloves.
And take the gentleman on the left. At first glance, he looks pretty good, but if you start to look in detail, he's not so good. Look at his gloves. At first, you think he's got protective hand wear on, but the fingers are exposed. So odds are that that's not going to repel any pesticide that he might accidentally splash on him. There is no air gap in the back tank there. So if a flow would stop, we could actually potentially siphon it back into our water source. Correct. Which can cause a big problem down the road.
Correct. So these are just some things that we'd like to point out, with some visual pictures. Again, these were just random pictures through a presentation that we don't have any background information on. So, we don't know for sure what they're using or anything like that. But if we are using products that we typically use in our area, there would be more required PPE than what we're seeing in these situations.
Yes. So, if for some reason it doesn't have personal protective equipment on it, here's the minimum. Here is the bare minimum that you need, and if nothing else, it makes you look like a professional. And everybody wants to be a professional in their field. We need shoes and socks, long pants, long sleeve shirt, and gloves. But always double check that label, because there's most of the time will be more specific information on the pesticide PPE equipment that is needed.
Agreed totally.
All gloves are not created the same. some of the, we can get gloves anywhere, can't we, Ted?
We can. And when we are looking for specific gloves for chemical handling, we want to make sure that we are utilizing the proper specifications to be able to use them in a chemical situation.
If we use a glove that is not chemical resistant, that chemical can actually dissolve the glove and cause us more problems than if we did.
Or even melt it to your skin itself.
Very possible.
So do pay close attention to the type of products that you're purchasing to be safe when you're applying these products.
Safety data sheets. We're required to have those anytime that we're applying pesticides. And we need to make them relatively available for if somebody would come and we're incapacitated. It goes over the name, product use, restrictions, who manufactured it, a lot of good information in there.
So make sure that you do get the safety data sheets if you are using multiple chemicals and things like that. If you're just using a few each year or something like that, it's probably pretty easy to get your hands on one or two of these things, but there are actually folders of these things available that if you wanted to purchase those or get your hands on them, there's ways of doing so. So definitely have that in your chemical storage area so that they can be referred back to in case there is some type of exposure to the applicator.
If you lose the label or lose the safety data sheet or material data sheet, there is a couple of good websites we can go to at our convenience and print them off. So we will always have access to them, so there's no excuse why we don't have them.
Good information, Phil. Okay, so pesticide cleanup. After applying pesticides, we want to make sure that we're washing any reusable PPE with soap and water and letting it dry.
Sure.
It's really important to do that. Anything that's a single-use PPE, don't try to stretch that out. Go ahead and discard that. It's probably got some contamination on it, no matter which way that you think. Just throw it away and reuse new single-use PPE.
Always wash your hands and face when you get finished cleaning up everything with soap and water. And make sure that water is kind of free-flowing so that we're not recontaminating ourselves.
Yes, that's really important. And truthfully, the best recommendation that we can provide you is that it's a good rule of practice that anytime that we're out applying pesticides, that as soon as we're done applying those pesticides and we clean our sprayer, just park it and then take time to go back to the house, wash up thoroughly, change your clothes, and then move on to the next part of the day, because the longer you leave any kind of contaminated clothing or PPE on, the more you are increasing your risk of exposure. So if we can cut down on just a little bit of that risk, it's going to help us out tremendously as we move forward for years and years and years of doing these pesticide applications. So definitely take the time to do that. I know it's not in most of our days that we want to do that, but if we can just take the little bit of time that it would take us to do that, your family's going to be happy and you're going to be happy in the long run.
Sure, and like we said earlier, the dose makes the poison, so we want to make that dose as small as possible. When you get through cleaning it, everything, make sure that it's completely dry before you do this. Once you get through and it's dry, stick it in a resealable bag and then keep it away from your pesticides. Yes, it's convenient to store right next to my pesticides. No, that's not a great idea. So we want to make sure we have its own little place away from the pesticides.
And it's pretty good to keep that in a clean, dry location at the house, like basement or in a closet or something like that. So that it's there, it's ready to grab a bag and go, but it's not exposed to heat and cold and all the elements by sitting in the back of the truck behind the seat or something like that. So do keep that in a place where it's nice and clean and dry, so that those particular items will maintain longevity as well too. So it's really important from that side of things.
Washing PPE, I know, Tad, you just mentioned that we need to wash our clothes. Make sure that you wash your pesticide-exposed clothes by themselves. Once you do that, do a rinse cycle through your washer before you put any more family laundry into that washer machine.
And you'll want to do that rinse cycle at least 3 times just to make sure that you get all the stuff out of the internal parts of the washer and things like that as well too. If they've got quite a bit of contamination on them, just throw your clothes away. In the long run, it's going to be safer for you and your family. You definitely don't want to wash your family's clothes right behind a load of highly soaked clothes that you've run through the washer. So definitely make sure that you do take the time. We're gonna say triple rinse your washer just like you triple rinse your containers, and then that way you try to cut down on the amount of residue that would be left in that device that's going to be handling your family's clothes as well too. So definitely keep that in mind when you're washing those. But first off, if it's got quite a bit on it, just throw it away. Don't even bring it into the house. Just throw it away as soon as you possibly can. And then that way it's going to be safer for the whole system.
Yeah, and then I've been asked a time or two what my opinion was on the high efficiency washers that we have nowadays versus some of the older ones that use a lot more water. Do they do a good job as the old ones do? And actually, Colorado State University did a study on this. And yes, the high efficiency washers will get your clothes just as clean as the older washing machines that use a lot more water.
Good deal. Well, we hope you guys have enjoyed, some updates and some safety tips about pesticide application and how to handle PPE and, handling yourself from a safety aspect and things like that. If you have any questions, feel free to contact your local extension office. They will definitely be able to give you some more input on some of these items that we discussed as well too. But again, thank you for your time and hope you enjoyed the presentation.